She lived as a beta for 5 years to escape the mark, until the Alpha King did the unthinkable. Run, little rabbit, or the wolf will realize you aren't made of stone. Serrilla Greymount stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, the words echoing from a memory she had tried to bury 5 years ago. Her hands shook as she uncorked the vial of null root extract. It smelled of wet ash and bitter defeat. Outside, the bells of the capital tolled, signaling the arrival of King Corbin Stonevale, the man whose very presence commanded the air in the room to thin. "Just one more day," she whispered, the lie tasting like copper on her tongue. "Just be invisible." But as the liquid burned down her throat, searing away her scent, she didn't know that invisibility was no longer an option. The king wasn't looking for a queen. He was hunting for a spy, and today, for the first time in 5 years, the wind was blowing the wrong way. The royal archives of Stonevale were a mausoleum of dust and forgotten treaties, a place where sunlight went to die. For Serrilla Greymount, it was paradise. Dust-masked scents. The smell of decaying parchment and iron gall ink was a better shield than any armor a knight could wear. For 5 years, Serrilla had existed in the grayscale world of a beta. She walked with the clipped, purposeful stride of the worker class. She kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance, never challenging, never inviting. She wore heavy woolens that scratched her skin and flattened her curve, and every morning she drank the poison that kept her alive. Null root. It was illegal, expensive, and slowly killing her. It numbed her extremities and dulled her senses, turning the vibrant world of scents, the pheromones that dictated society's hierarchy, into a muted background noise. It was the price of freedom. "Serrilla, you're staring at the genealogy of House Goldheart again." The voice made her jump, though she controlled the flinch, turning it into a casual adjustment of her spectacles. Bennett Crestwood stood in the doorway, the morning light catching the silver embroidery on his uniform. Bennett was the captain of the guard, a beta like herself, or so she let him believe, and the closest thing she had to a friend. He was safe. He smelled of polished leather and rain, a scent so mild it didn't trigger the primal panic that alphas induced in her. "House Goldheart has a complex lineage, Captain," Serrilla said, her voice pitched low and steady. "If the king intends to dismantle their trade routes, I need to know who holds the unseen deeds." Bennett stepped into the room, the floorboards groaning under his boots. He had a kind face, one that hadn't been hardened by the cruel politics of the court, though he carried a sword that said otherwise. "You work too hard, Seer. Most archivists are asleep by noon. You act as if the kingdom will crumble if you miss a footnote." "History crumbles when footnotes are missed," she replied, closing the heavy leather tome. She felt a sharp pang in her stomach, the potion digesting. She ignored it. "Is the king back from the border?" Bennett's expression tightened. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier just at the mention of him. "He returned an hour ago. The mood in the palace is fractured. The border skirmishes with the northern clans didn't go well. He's looking for leaks, spies." Serrilla felt a cold sweat prickle the back of her neck. Spies. The word was a net cast, wide enough to catch anyone hiding something, and she was hiding the biggest secret of all. In this kingdom, Omegas were not archivists. They were not scholars. They were prized possessions, protected and cloistered, married off to secure alliances, their biology dictating their destiny. To be an unmated Omega running loose was a crime against the crown. To be an Omega impersonating a beta was treason. "He won't find what he's looking for in the archives," Serrilla said, forcing a dry chuckle, "unless the spy is a 300-year-old tax ledger." Bennett didn't smile. He walked over to her desk, leaning in close. Too close. Even with the suppressant, her instincts screamed at the proximity. "He's coming here, Serrilla. Today." The blood drained from her face. "Here. The king never visits the archives. He suspects the leak is in the documentation, in the orders sent to the front lines. He wants to review the scribes." Bennett lowered his voice. "Lady Danessa Thornhall is with him." Serrilla's hand spasmed, knocking over her inkwell. Black liquid pooled across the desk like a spreading shadow. Danessa. The alpha female was the king's second-in-command, a woman with eyes like fractured ice and a nose that could track a fox through a thunderstorm. If Corbin Stonevale was the hammer, Danessa was the scalpel. I should prepare the records," Serrilla stammered, grabbing a rag to blot the ink. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Calm down. You are a beta. You are boring. You are invisible." "Serrilla," Bennett said softly, placing a hand over hers to stop her frantic scrubbing. His skin was warm. "You're trembling. Are you ill?" She looked up at him, seeing genuine concern in his hazel eyes. If he knew what she was, that concern would turn to pity or hunger. "Just the cold, Bennett. The drafts in here are terrible in winter." He studied her for a moment, longer than necessary, his gaze lingering on the pulse, fluttering visibly in her throat. "I'll stay with you," he promised. "I won't let Danessa bully you. She eats scribes for breakfast." "And the king?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What does he eat?" Bennett grimaced, pulling back. "He doesn't eat, Serrilla. He devours. Just keep your head down. Speak only when spoken to. And for the God's sake, don't look him in the eye. They say he can smell fear." Serrilla nodded, turning back to the ruined ledger. She didn't need to look him in the eye to know that was true. She just prayed that Null Root could mask the scent of terror as well as it masked the scent of honey and lavender that was her soul. The arrival of Alpha King Corbin Stonevale was not marked by trumpets, but by silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that rolled through the corridors of the archives, extinguishing conversations and making the dust motes stand still. Serrilla stood in line with the 3 other junior archivists, her head bowed, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their shaking. The doors groaned open. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly. First came Danessa Thornhall. She moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the stone. She wore a military tunic fitted perfectly to her powerful frame, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe braid. Her scent hit Serrilla even through the suppressant, ozone and steel, sharp, biting, dominant. Then, him. Corbin Stonevale was larger than the statues in the courtyard. He was a wall of muscle and dark intent, clad in black leather and fur, the crown on his head a simple band of iron that looked like it had been forged in a dying star. But it was his presence that terrified Serrilla. It was a physical weight, a gravitational pull that demanded submission. His scent, masked partially by the cold outdoors, was underneath it all. Burning cedar, dark earth, and something metallic, like blood on snow. "Report," Corbin said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Serrilla's chest cavity. The head archivist, a trembling elderly beta named Mr. Pendergast, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we have compiled the communication logs from the last quarter, as requested." Corbin didn't look at the old man. His eyes, dark as obsidian, were scanning the room. They swept over the shelves, the dust, and finally, the line of scribes. "The leak," Corbin said, walking slowly down the line, "contained details about the supply lines to the western ridge. Details that were only transcribed in this room. He stopped in front of the first scribe, a young man who looked ready to faint. Corbin inhaled deeply, the sound sharp in the quiet room. You smell of stale ale and guilt, boy. But not treason. He moved to the next. Serrilla stopped breathing. She forced her heart rate to slow, using a meditation technique she had learned from a refugee monk years ago. I am stone. I am paper. I am nothing. Danessa was tearing through the desks on the other side of the room, throwing papers onto the floor. These records are a mess, Corbin. Any one of these rats could have slipped a copy out. Patience, Danessa, Corbin murmured. He was 2 steps away from Serrilla. He stopped in front of the girl beside her. He paused, tilting his head. You have a sick mother, he stated. Not a question. The girl wept softly. Yes, Your Majesty. I took extra parchment to sell. Only a few sheets, for medicine. I swear I didn't sell secrets. Corbin stared at her for a long, agonizing second. See that she gets the medicine, he told Bennett, who was standing guard by the door. Then fire her. I tolerate theft no more than treason. Then he stood in front of Serrilla. The world narrowed down to the black leather of his boots. The smell of him was overwhelming now, crashing against the barrier of the null root. It woke something ancient in her brain, a biological imperative that screamed, Alpha, screamed, submit, screamed, mate! She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, using the pain to anchor herself. Look at me, he commanded. It took every ounce of her will to lift her chin. She fixed her eyes on his jawline, refusing to meet his gaze directly. Up close, he was terrifyingly handsome. Harsh angles, a scar running through his left eyebrow, and eyes that burned with a fierce, restless intelligence. He frowned. He leaned closer, invading her personal space. His nose flared slightly. Serrilla stopped her lungs from expanding. If she breathed out, he might smell it. The faint, sickly sweetness of the suppressant, or worse, the omega scent beneath it, fighting to break free. You have no scent, Corbin said softly. It wasn't an accusation, but a curiosity. Even betas have a scent. Dust, ink, anxiety. You smell like nothing. I work with strong chemicals, Your Majesty, Serrilla lied, her voice steady despite the screaming in her head. Preservatives for the older scrolls. They tend to strip the senses. Is that so? Corbin reached out. Serrilla froze. His large, calloused hand moved toward her face. If he touched her, if he felt the texture of her skin, softer than a beta's should be, or felt the frantic rabbit kick of her pulse, it was over. His thumb grazed her cheekbone. A shock of electricity, hot and jarring, bolted through her. Corbin flinched, his eyes widening imperceptibly. He pulled his hand back as if burned. Static, he muttered, though he looked suspicious. Dry air. Yes, Your Majesty, she whispered. Danessa marched over, glaring at Serrilla. This one. She looks like she'd break if you sneezed at her. Check her desk, Corbin. I found an encryption cipher near the window. Corbin didn't look away from Serrilla. He was studying her pupils, watching the way they dilated. What is your name, scribe? Serrilla Greymount. Greymount. He tested the name, rolling it around his mouth like wine. You are the one Bennett speaks of. The diligent one. Captain Crestwood is kind. Captain Crestwood is naive, Corbin corrected. He leaned in again, his lips inches from her ear. I don't like blank spaces. Serrilla Greymount. I don't like things I cannot read. And you are a blank page. I am just an archivist, sire. We shall see. Corbin pulled back, his demeanor shifting instantly back to cold command. Danessa, seize the logs. Bring them to my study. And bring her, Serrilla's knees almost gave way. Me? You know the filing system, Corbin said, turning his back on her. You will interpret the shorthand. If there is a spy, you will help me find them, or you will hang with them. Bennett stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt, his face pale. Your Majesty, surely the head archivist would be better suited. I chose her, Corbin cut him off, his voice slashing through the air. He glanced back over his shoulder, his dark eyes locking onto Serrilla's. For a second, the predator was visible behind the king. Unless you have a reason to refuse your king, Miss Greymount. No, she breathed, realizing the trap had just snapped shut. I am at your service. The king's private study was not a room. It was a fortress. The walls were lined with weapons of war. Not books. A massive fire roared in the hearth, making the room stiflingly hot. For 3 hours, Serrilla had been standing at a high table, translating encoded shipping manifests, while Danessa Thornhall paced behind her like a caged tiger. King Corbin sat at his desk, signing documents, but Serrilla could feel his attention on her. It was a physical weight, pressing against her shoulder blades. The heat was the problem. Omegas were sensitive to temperature. The null root messed with her body's regulation. She was burning up. Sweat trickled down her spine. The dampness was dangerous. Sweat carried scent. Stop shaking, Danessa snapped, stopping right behind Serrilla. You're making me nervous, and I don't get nervous. The cipher is complex, my lady, Serrilla said, her voice raspy. She needed water. She needed to leave. The effects of her morning dose were wearing thin faster than usual due to the stress and the metabolic spike caused by the Alpha's proximity. Here, Danessa slammed a finger onto the parchment. This shipment to the Gold Heart estate. Why is it marked with a double seal? It indicates hazardous materials, Serrilla explained. Alchemical supplies. Or weapons, Corbin said. He had stood up. He moved silently for a man of his size. He came to stand beside the table, looming over both of them. He picked up the parchment Serrilla had just written on. Your handwriting is exquisite, he noted. Almost aristocratic. Serrilla kept her eyes on the wood grain of the table. My father was a calligrapher. He taught me before he passed. A half-truth. Her father had been a duke, executed for treason, which was why she was on the run. But the Greymount name was common enough in the lowlands. Goldheart, Corbin mused. Irene Witchard tells me that Lord Goldheart is planning a gala, an eclipse gala, tonight. I have heard rumors, sire, Serrilla said. I plan to attend, Corbin said, tossing the paper down. And I need a scribe to record the guests, the whispers, the debts discussed in corners. My usual secretary is indisposed. Serrilla risked a glance up. You want me to attend the gala? As part of your retinue? Why not? Corbin challenged, his eyes narrowing. You know the lineages, you know the connections. I have nothing to wear, she blurted out, a stupid, trivial excuse. That can be remedied, Danessa said with a sneer, though putting silk on a sow doesn't make her a prize. That is enough, Danessa, Corbin warned, his tone dropping an octave. The command in his voice made Danessa stiffen and look away, baring her neck slightly in submission. It was a display of alpha power that sent a wave of dizziness through Serrilla. The heat in the room spiked. Serrilla swayed. The edges of her vision blurred. The null root was failing. She could feel the barrier in her mind crumbling. Her true scent, a delicate mix of vanilla, rain-soaked earth, and hidden desire, was pushing against her pores. She dropped the quill. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. I feel unwell. You look grey, Corbin observed. He stepped closer. And you are sweating. He inhaled. Serrilla froze. panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the heat. He smells it. He smells the omega. Corbyn's expression shifted. Confusion, then intrigue. He leaned in, his face inches from her neck. He wasn't acting like a king now. He was acting like an animal catching a scent on the wind. Under the dust. What is that? I need air, Serrilla gasped. She turned to run, forgetting protocol, forgetting everything but the need to escape before the biology betrayed her. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She didn't hit the floor. Strong arms caught her. Hard, unyielding muscle. Corbyn had moved with impossible speed. He held her against his chest, and the contact was electric. For 5 years, she had avoided the touch of an alpha. Now, she was pressed against the strongest one in the kingdom. His scent enveloped her, crashing through her defenses. It didn't terrify her this time. It soothed her. It was heavy, grounding, protective. Her inner omega preened, recognizing strength. Safe. Mate. King. No, she whimpered, pushing against his chest. Corbyn didn't let go. He held her easily, his grip firm but not crushing. He looked down at her, his dark eyes wide, pupils blown out so far the iris was barely visible. Danessa, he growled, his voice rough, unrecognizable. Leave us. Corbyn? Danessa asked, shocked. She's just a fainting beta. Let me call a healer. I said leave, Corbyn roared. The sound shook the weapons on the walls. It was an alpha command, pure and undiluted. Danessa stumbled back, clutching her chest, her instincts forcing her to obey. She fled the room, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. Serrilla was alone with the Alpha King, and the mask was gone. She trembled in his arms, waiting for the anger, for the arrest, for the realization that she was a fugitive. Corbyn slowly lowered her to the nearest chair, but he didn't pull away. He braced his hands on the armrests, trapping her. He brought his face close to hers, inhaling deeply, shamelessly, drinking in the scent that was now pouring off her, as the potion dissolved completely. You aren't a beta, he whispered. It was a statement of awe, not anger. You are an omega. Serrilla squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. Please, please let me go. I'll leave the city. You'll never see me again. Leave? Corbyn laughed, a dark, breathless sound. You think I would let you leave? He reached out, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin of her nape, right where a mating mark would go. Serrilla sobbed, anticipating the bite. It was the right of any unbonded alpha to claim an unmated omega found wandering. It was the law, but he didn't bite. Instead, his thumb traced the pulse point of her throat. For 5 years, I have searched for something real in this kingdom of liars, Corbyn murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. And here you were, hiding in the dust. He pulled back, standing to his full height, his expression hardening into something unreadable. The lust was there, burning in his eyes, but it was checked by a terrifying clarity. You will go to the Eclipse Gala tonight, Corbyn declared. Serrilla stared at him, bewildered. What? But not as a scribe, he continued. You will go as my guest, and you will stay by my side every second. They will smell me, she whispered. Everyone will know. Let them know, Corbyn said, a dark smile curving his lips, a smile that promised violence to anyone who dared challenge him. Let Goldheart see, let the court see. See what? Corbyn leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sent shivers down her spine. That the king has found a treasure, and that if anyone dares to look at you, speak to you, or breathe the same air as you without my permission, I will burn their houses to the ground. He turned to the door. Bennett, he shouted, get the carriage, and get the dressmaker. He looked back at Serrilla, who was huddled in the chair, caught between terror and a strange, thrilling heat. "The game is over, Serrilla," he said. "Now, the war begins." The royal carriage didn't rattle. It glided, suspended on reinforced springs and magic-dampened wheels. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the scent of Corbin Stonevale. Serrilla sat on the velvet bench, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt like a stranger in her own skin. The grey wool of the archivist was gone, replaced by a gown that felt less like clothing and more like a declaration of war. It was a deep, midnight blue, the colour of the sky just before a storm, made of silk so fine it rippled like water with every breath she took. The bodice was structured, pushing up curves she had spent half a decade binding flat, and the back was daringly low, exposing the vulnerable ridge of her spine. "Stop pulling at the lace," Corbin said. He was sitting opposite her, watching her with that unnerving, predatory intensity. "You look adequate." "Adequate?" Serrilla let out a shaky laugh. "I look like a sacrifice, Your Majesty. You've dressed me in the colours of House Stonevale. You might as well paint a target on my back." "The target was already there, Serrilla. I just gave you armour." Corbin leaned forward, his dark eyes tracing the line of her throat where a diamond choker sat, heavy and cold. "And stop calling me Your Majesty when we are alone. It sounds like a lie coming from your mouth." "What should I call you? My captor?" Corbin smiled, a flash of white teeth in the dim carriage light. "Corbin will do. For now." The carriage slowed as they approached the Goldheart estate. Through the window, Serrilla saw a sea of torches and heard the murmur of the crowd. The elite of the kingdom were gathering, alphas and betas, draped in jewels and arrogance. "I can't go in there," she whispered, the panic rising again. Without the null root, her senses were raw. She could smell the roasting meats, the perfumes, and the overwhelming, chaotic mix of pheromones from 100 yards away. "They'll know. The moment I step out, every alpha in that room will know what I am." "Let them know," Corbin said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated against her ribs. He moved to the seat beside her, the leather creaking under his weight. "Listen to me." He took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look at him. His touch was hot, grounding. "You are under my protection," he said fiercely. "That means something in this kingdom. If they smell you, they will also smell me on you. My scent is your shield. Do you understand?" He rubbed his thumb against her jaw, deliberately transferring his scent, burning cedar and iron, onto her skin. It was a possessive, intimate gesture that made Serrilla's breath hitch. Her inner omega preened at the claim, while her rational mind screamed at the danger. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, searching his eyes. "You execute traitors. I have lied to the crown for 5 years." Corbin's expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. "Because you are the only thing in my life that isn't trying to sell me something. Kill me or marry me for a title. You are hiding to survive. I respect survival." The carriage halted. The door swung open. The noise of the gala hit them like a physical blow. A footman bowed low. Corbin stepped out first, his presence silencing the nearby crowd. He turned and extended a hand to her. "Come, Serrilla," he commanded, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "Time to rewrite history." She took his hand. As she stepped onto the cobblestones, the wind shifted, carrying her scent, sweet vanilla and rain, now laced with the king's heavy cedar, toward the entrance. Heads turned. Conversations died. And Serrilla Greymount, the invisible archivist, walked into the lion's den on the arm of the lion himself. The grand ballroom of House Goldheart was a spectacle of excess. Chandeliers made of crystal and gold hung from the ceiling like weeping stars, and the floor was a polished mirror of black marble. But Serrilla noticed none of it. She was too busy trying not to drown in the sensory overload. The room was a minefield of scents. Alphas smelled like brandy, leather, ozone, and musk. Sharp, aggressive, demanding space. Betas were milder, fresh linen, chalk, wood shavings. But underneath it all, she could sense the hungry curiosity directed at her. "Stay close," Corbin murmured, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. His heat seeped through the thin silk of her dress. "I wasn't planning on wandering off," she muttered, keeping her eyes forward. "King Corbin!" A booming voice cut through the music. Lord Goldheart approached them, a large man with a florid face and a scent that reminded Serrilla of overripe fruit and copper coins. He was wealthy, influential, and, if the archives were correct, funding the rebellion in the north. "We are honored, truly honored," Goldheart gushed, bowing low but keeping his eyes on Corbin. When he straightened, his gaze slid to Serrilla, and his nostrils flared. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "And you have brought a guest?" "Serrilla Greymount," Corbin introduced her, his tone daring Goldheart to comment. "My personal archivist, and my companion for the evening." "An archivist?" Goldheart's eyes narrowed, dissecting her. He leaned in slightly, sniffing the air. "Forgive me, my dear, but you have a most unique fragrance. I wasn't aware the archives employed Omegas." The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Serrilla felt her pulse spike. Beside her, Corbin stiffened, his muscles coiling. "The archives employ talent, Lord Goldheart," Corbin said, his voice ice-cold. "Miss Greymount's designation is none of your concern, unless you wish to discuss biology instead of the trade tariffs you've been neglecting." Goldheart paled, stepping back. "Of course not, Your Majesty. Just a harmless observation. Please, enjoy the wine. It's a vintage from the Southern Isles." As Goldheart retreated, a woman stepped out from the crowd. She was striking, with hair like spun silver and a gown of crimson velvet. Irene Witchard, the daughter of the High General, and the woman the court had bet would be Corbin's queen. She smelled of cold roses and expensive parchment. A beta, but one with the ambition of an alpha. "Corbin," Irene said, her smile not reaching her eyes. She ignored Serrilla entirely. "You're late. The first waltz is about to begin. I saved a space on my card." "I'm afraid I'm occupied, Irene," Corbin said dismissively. "Occupied?" Irene finally looked at Serrilla, her gaze raking over the blue dress. "Oh, the little mouse from the library. I didn't recognize you without the dust." "Lady Witchard," Serrilla said, dipping into a curtsy that was technically perfect, but functionally brief. "It's amazing what a bath can do." Corbin let out a short, sharp laugh. Irene's smile tightened. "The music is starting," Corbin said, turning his back on Irene. He looked down at Serrilla. "Do you dance, Miss Greymount?" "I haven't danced in 5 years," she whispered. "Then follow my lead." He pulled her onto the floor. The orchestra swelled. Corbin moved with surprising grace for a man of his size, sweeping her into the rhythm of the waltz. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them. The staring eyes, the whispering court, the danger. It all faded into a blur of color. There was only the heat of his hand on her waist, the strength of his shoulder under her fingers, and the intense gravity of his gaze. "You handled Irene well," he murmured, pulling her a fraction closer than propriety allowed. "She hates me," Serrilla said. "She hates everyone who isn't me," Corbin corrected. "And she only tolerates me because she wants the crown." "And you?" Serrilla asked, emboldened by the adrenaline. "What do you want?" Corbin stopped spinning, holding her in a dip that left her breathless. His face was inches from hers. The intensity in his eyes burned her. "I want the truth," he whispered. "Why did you run, Serrilla? Who were you before the grey dress?" Serrilla swallowed hard. "I was a daughter of a dead man, a prize to be won. I didn't want to be owned, Corbin. I wanted to be free." And now? She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the loneliness behind the power, the man trapped in the role of a king, just as she had been trapped in the role of a beta. "Now," she whispered, "I think I might be in more danger than ever." Corbin pulled her upright as the music ended, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Danger, yes. But freedom? Perhaps we can find a version of it. Together." Before she could answer, a scream shattered the atmosphere. The scream came from the terrace doors. The music screeched to a halt. Bennett Crestwood burst into the ballroom, his sword drawn, his face smeared with soot. He spotted Corbin and sprinted toward them, ignoring the gasps of the nobility. "Your Majesty!" Bennett shouted. "The East Wing! It's on fire!" Chaos erupted. Lords and ladies began to shove toward the exits. "Stay with me," Corbin commanded, grabbing Serrilla's arm. "Bennett, report. Is it an attack?" "Incendiary devices," Bennett gasped, skidding to a halt. "Planted in the ventilation. But sire, it's a distraction." "A distraction for what?" As if in answer, the massive chandelier above them gave a groan of tortured metal. Corbin looked up. The chain had been cut. "Move!" He didn't run away. He threw himself at Serrilla. He tackled her, his body covering hers completely as they hit the marble floor. A second later, the world exploded. Glass and crystal rained down like deadly hail. The sound was deafening, a crash that shook the foundations of the house. A shard of crystal the size of a spear slammed into the floor exactly where Serrilla had been standing a heartbeat ago. Dust and smoke billowed up, choking the room. Serrilla coughed, her ears ringing. She was pinned under a heavy weight. "Corbin?" "I'm here," he grunted. His voice was strained. He pushed himself up on his elbows, shielding her from the settling debris. Blood trickled down his temple, dark and stark against his pale skin. He looked down at her, checking her for injuries with frantic eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. I don't think so. You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He stood up, hauling her with him. The predator was fully awake now. He scanned the chaotic room, his lip curled in a snarl. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a general attack. He looked at the shattered chandelier, then at the specific spot where they had been standing. "They were aiming for me," Serrilla realized, her voice trembling. "Or you?" "No," Corbin said darkly. He pointed to the debris. Buried amidst the glass was a dagger, a throwing knife, distinctly marked with a black ribbon. It hadn't fallen from the ceiling. It had been thrown in the confusion, aimed low, aimed at Serrilla's stomach. "They missed," Corbin growled. Danessa Thornhall appeared through the smoke, her sword out, her eyes wild. She looked at Corbin, then at Serrilla, and relief washed over her face, followed instantly by suspicion. "The exits are sealed," Danessa barked. "Someone locked the doors from the outside before the fire started. We are trapped in the ballroom." "Goldheart," Corbin snarled. "Where is he?" "Gone," Bennett said, stepping up beside them. "He vanished right before the explosion." The smoke was getting thicker, acrid and smelling of magical accelerant. The crowd was panicking, pushing against the locked double doors. "We need to get out," Serrilla coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve. The smoke is laced with wolf's bane," Corbin realized, sniffing the air. "It weakens alphas. It strips our strength." He stumbled slightly, gripping Serrilla's shoulder for support. His skin was suddenly burning hot, feverish. Danessa too looked pale, her sword arm trembling. "They are trying to incapacitate the Alphas," Serrilla whispered. She looked at Bennett. He was standing straight, unaffected. He was a beta. The smoke didn't hurt him. "Bennett," Serrilla said urgently. "The service hatch. In the archives, I saw the blueprints of this estate. There is a service hatch behind the orchestra pit. It leads to the wine cellar." Bennett looked at her, his eyes unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. "Show me." "No," Corbin rasped. He was leaning heavily on her now, his immense strength draining away rapidly. "I won't let you leave my sight. You have to trust me," Serrilla said, grabbing his face. The role reversal was sudden and terrifying. The king was weakening, and she, the hidden Omega, was the only one with a clear head. "I know the way out. But you have to move. Now." Corbin stared at her, fighting the fog in his mind. Then he nodded. "Lead the way, little rabbit." Serrilla took his hand, pulling his heavy arm over her shoulder. "Danessa, help me." Together, the Omega and the female Alpha dragged the king through the panicked crowd. They reached the orchestra pit. Serrilla kicked aside a heavy velvet curtain, revealing a small, iron-bound door. "Locked," Bennett said, trying the handle. "Stand back," Danessa wheezed. She raised her sword, summoning the last of her strength, and smashed the pommel against the lock mechanism. It shattered. They tumbled into the darkness of the service tunnel, just as the ballroom doors on the far side of the room were breached. Not by rescuers, but by men in masks carrying crossbows. "Assassins!" Bennett hissed, slamming the hatch shut and barring it. They were in the dark. The air was cool and damp, free of the poison smoke. Corbin slid down the wall to the floor, breathing hard. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew I would be here. They knew about you." He reached out in the dark, finding Serrilla's hand. His grip was weak, desperate. "Serrilla," he rasped. "The suppressant. Do you have any left?" "No," she said, kneeling beside him. "Why?" "Because," Corbin groaned, his head lolling back. "The wolfsbane. It doesn't just weaken us. It triggers a rut in alphas, who are near an unmated omega. It forces the biology to fight the poison by accelerating the mating drive." Serrilla froze. In the dark, she could hear Danessa's ragged breathing and Bennett's sharp intake of breath. "We are trapped in a tunnel," Serrilla whispered, horror dawning, "with two alphas who are about to lose their minds." "Run!" Corbin commanded, his voice a broken growl. "Serrilla, get away from me! Now!" But there was nowhere to run. The tunnel only went one way, deeper into the dark, and from the top of the hatch they heard the heavy thud of an axe chopping through the wood. The assassins were coming. Serrilla looked at the dying king, then at the locked door leading deeper underground. She made a choice. "I'm not leaving you," she said softly. She stood up and turned to Bennett. "Give me your dagger," she ordered. Bennett hesitated, then handed it to her. Serrilla slashed the silk of her skirt, freeing her legs. She turned back to the king, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. "If we are going to die," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "we are going to die fighting. Can you stand, Corbin?" A low, feral growl answered her. Two gold eyes flared in the darkness. "For you," the king said, his voice no longer human. "I can kill." The first assassin dropped through the hatch, a shadow of black leather and steel. Before his boots hit the ground, Corbin moved. It was a blur of violence. Despite the wolfsbane coursing through his veins, the king was a force of nature. He didn't use a weapon. He used his hands, snapping the assassin's neck with a brutal, efficient twist. But the effort cost him. Corbin staggered back, his chest heaving, sweat soaking his torn shirt. "Bennett!" Serrilla screamed. "Watch the flank!" She turned to the captain of the guard, expecting to see his sword raised in defense. Instead, she saw the tip of his blade pointing at her throat. Time seemed to freeze. The damp air of the tunnel grew suffocatingly still. Bennett's hazel eyes, usually so warm and safe, were cold and wet with tears. "I'm sorry, Seer," Bennett whispered, his hand trembling. "Goldheart promised no bloodshed if we handed over the king. He just wants the crown. He doesn't want a war." "You," Serrilla breathed, the betrayal hitting her harder than any physical blow. "You were the one who told them about the archives. You told them about the gala." "Corbin is a tyrant," Bennett shouted, his voice cracking. "He drags us into border wars. He starves the trade routes. Goldheart offers stability. He offers peace. He offers chains!" Corbin snarled. He tried to lunge, but his legs gave out. The wolfsbane had paralyzed his motor functions. He hit the dirt floor, snarling like a wounded beast. "Don't move, Your Majesty," Bennett said, swinging the sword toward the fallen king. "The wolfsbane is concentrated. If you exert yourself, your heart will stop." Danessa, slumped against the wall, let out a weak curse. "Traitorous filth, I'll gut you." "Stay back," Bennett warned. "The assassins are right behind me. Just surrender." Serrilla looked at Bennett, then at Corbin. The king was dying. His skin was grey, his breathing shallow, but his eyes, those golden, burning eyes, were fixed on her. Not with fear, but with an apology. "Run," he mouthed. Serrilla tightened her grip on the dagger Bennett had given her earlier. The irony burned. "You're right, Bennett," Serrilla said softly, stepping between the traitor and the king. "I spent 5 years hiding. I was invisible. Safe. Step aside, Serrilla. You don't have to die for him." "But you forgot one thing," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't hide because I was weak. I hid because I knew what I was worth." She didn't lunge at Bennett. She lunged at Corbin. Bennett flinched, confused. Serrilla dropped to her knees beside the king. She didn't offer comfort. She grabbed the collar of his shirt and ripped it open, exposing the junction of his neck and shoulder, the mating gland. "Do it," she commanded, locking eyes with him. "No," Corbin wheezed, fighting the instinct. "I won't enslave you." "It's not slavery if I choose it," she screamed. "The bond shares vitality. Your strength becomes mine, but my life force becomes yours. It will burn out the poison. Mark me, Corbin. Now." It was the unthinkable act, for an Alpha King to mark a commoner, a fugitive, without a ceremony, without a contract. It broke every law of the court. It was primal. It was permanent. Bennett realized what was happening. "Stop her!" He lunged. Corbin roared, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling. His hesitation shattered. He buried his teeth into the curve of Serrilla's neck. Pain, sharp and exquisite, exploded through her. It was followed instantly by a flood of power like liquid fire. She felt his heartbeat sink with hers. She felt the wolfsbane burning up in his blood, neutralized by the sudden, massive surge of endorphins and bonding hormones. Bennett's sword came down. Serrilla moved. She didn't just dodge. She flowed. The bond had flooded her with alpha reflexes. She caught Bennett's wrist mid-swing, her grip like iron. Bennett gasped, looking into her eyes. They weren't soft grey anymore. They were rimmed with gold. "You chose the wrong side, Captain," she whispered. She twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the sword. Behind her, Corbin stood up. He wasn't staggering. He was fully erect, his wounds closing, his aura expanding, until it filled the tunnel with terrifying pressure. The assassins poured through the hatch. Corbin smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated death. "My queen," he said, his voice echoing with power. "Close your eyes. The sun was rising over the capital when they kicked open the doors of the throne room. Serrilla walked at the front. Her blue silk dress was shredded, stained with mud and blood. A bandage, hastily made from Corbyn's tunic, covered the fresh, weeping bite mark on her neck. She looked like a ruin. She looked like a queen. Corbyn walked a step behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword he had taken from a dead assassin. Danessa, limping but alive, flanked them. Lord Goldheart was sitting on the throne. The court was packed, lords and ladies, roused from their beds by the news of the tragic fire and the king's death, were murmuring in confusion. Goldheart froze as the doors banged open. The glass of wine in his hand shattered on the floor. "You're dead," Goldheart whispered. The tunnel collapsed. "The tunnel held," Serrilla said, her voice projecting across the vast hall without a tremble. "Unlike your honor." "Seize them!" Goldheart shrieked, standing up. "That woman is an impostor, an unregistered Omega. She has bewitched the king." The royal guard hesitated. They looked at Goldheart, then at Corbyn. Corbyn stepped forward. The air in the room grew heavy, the Alpha command rolling off him in waves. But it was different now. It was tempered, anchored. "She's not an impostor," Corbyn announced, his voice deep and resonant. "And she's not just an Omega." He reached out and ripped the bandage from Serrilla's neck. The court gasped. The mating mark was visible to all, swollen, bruised, and undeniable. "She is my mate," Corbyn declared. "And by the ancient laws of Stonevale, the mate of the king is the voice of the crown." "This is madness!" Irene Witchard stepped forward from the crowd, her face pale with rage. "You marked a nobody, a fugitive. She has no bloodline. She brings nothing to the alliance." "She brings the truth," Corbyn said. He looked at Serrilla. "Tell them." Serrilla stepped onto the dais. She didn't look at the nobles. She looked at the scribes huddled in the corner, her former colleagues. "Lord Goldheart didn't just burn his own estate," Serrilla said clearly. "He has been falsifying the northern trade ledgers for 3 years. He created the shortage of grain to drive up prices. He funded the border skirmishes to distract the king while he sold our iron to the enemy." "Lies!" Goldheart roared. "Where is your proof?" "The proof," Serrilla said, tapping her temple, "is in the archives. Section 4, Row B, the genealogy of House Goldheart. It's not a genealogy book. It's a double-entry ledger. I found it 6 months ago. I didn't understand what it was until tonight." She turned to the scribes. "Fetch it." Goldheart drew a dagger. He knew it was over. With a howl of desperation, he lunged not at Corbyn, but at Irene Witchard, his partner in crime, now a liability. Corbyn didn't move. He didn't have to. Serrilla threw Bennett's dagger. It flew end over end, a silver blur, and pinned Goldheart's sleeve to the heavy wooden throne. He screamed, dropping his weapon. Corbyn walked up the steps slowly. He looked down at the whimpering lord, then turned to the court. "The war is over," Corbyn said. "The rot has been cut out." He turned to Serrilla. He didn't command her. He didn't pull her. He slowly went down on one knee. A silence louder than the explosion descended on the room. The Alpha King, who had never bowed to anyone, was kneeling before an Omega in a torn dress. "I spent my life building walls to keep enemies out," Corbyn said, loud enough for history to hear. "I never realized I was locking myself in, until you." He took her hand and kissed the knuckles, bloody and bruised. Long live the Queen, 3 months later. The royal archives had been remodeled. The windows were open, letting in the sunlight and the scent of the ocean. Serrilla sat at a desk, not a small, cramped one in the corner, but a large oak table in the center of the room. She wasn't wearing grey wool. She wore a dress of soft lavender, the collar high but loose, leaving the silver scar of the mating mark visible. "You're working again," a voice said from the doorway. Serrilla smiled, not looking up from the treaty she was drafting. "It's a peace treaty with the northern clans, Corbin. Someone has to make sure the syntax is correct, or you'll accidentally declare war on their sheep." Corbin walked in. He looked different. The hard lines of stress around his eyes had softened. He wore his crown, but he wore it lightly. "I have advisors for that," he said, coming to stand behind her. He rested his chin on the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her shoulders. "Your advisors are afraid of you," she teased, leaning back into his warmth. "I'm not." "I know," he murmured, kissing her temple. "It's terrifying." He placed a piece of parchment on the table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked. "A new decree," Corbin said. "I signed it this morning." Serrilla read it. Her eyes widened. "The designation of Omega shall no longer prohibit employment, education, or property ownership. The use of null root is hereby decriminalized for medical transition, but mandatory suppression is abolished. Freedom of scent is the law of the land." Tears pricked her eyes. "Corbin, this will upset the council." "Let them be upset," he shrugged. "I have the strongest mate in the kingdom. Let them try to argue with us." He turned her chair around so she faced him. "You ran for 5 years to escape a cage," he said softly. "I want to make sure you never feel trapped again. Not even by me." Serrilla reached up and touched his face. "I stopped running the moment I met you in the dark." "And Bennett?" she asked, the shadow of the betrayal still lingering. "Exiled," Corbin said, "to the Western Watchtower. He lives, but he will never see the capital again. Mercy for your sake." "But justice?" "For mine." Serrilla nodded. It was enough. She stood up, the paper in her hand. "I need to file this," she said, "in the permanent section." "Later," Corbin growled playfully, scooping her up into his arms. "The archives are closed for lunch." "Corbin, put me down. The scribes will see." "Let them see," the Alpha King laughed, carrying his Omega out into the sun. "Let them write it down. The story of Serrilla and Corbin is a reminder that the strongest armor isn't made of steel, but of the courage to be oneself in a world that demands conformity. Serrilla survived by hiding, but she truly lived only when she stopped apologizing for her existence. Love, in its truest form, is not about possession or control. It is about finding an equal who amplifies your strength and heals your fractures. True power isn't forcing others to kneel. It's having the strength to stand together. If this story of rebellion, romance, and redemption moved you, please like this story, share it with a friend who loves a good alpha romance, and subscribe for more tales of love that defies the odds.